Shabbat Shalom. What a treat to have you with us for another edition of Bagels, Love, and Torah. I'm Rabbi Philip Rice of Congregation Micah, and I welcome you all virtually to another edition of Torah study done on the internet. I'm missing you, our regulars who come together and actually share in a breakfast of bagels and experience the love and the Torah. So hopefully we'll get back soon. I don't know when that's going to happen. And in the short run, rather than do the Zoom thing, we continue to offer insights from the parashah, from the Torah portion. This week we'll be looking at Pinchas. And by way of introduction, we always begin with blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. So as we la'asok, busy ourselves, or soak in words of Torah, we begin with a little brain candy. I was looking in the June edition of Smithsonian about Philip and Alexander, a ruthless king, a murderer, the son who would conquer the world. And I came across this reading I wanted to share with you about a father, not a king. Throughout history, kings have had the most to fear from their own families, particularly their children. Some wise kings have avoided it. Louis XIV said, if I must fight, it shall be with my enemies rather than with my children. Absalom, a son of King David, grew estranged from his father. Indeed, Absalom eventually rebelled and was killed in the attempt to usurp David's throne. But before that, David's agent Joab arranged a last attempt at reconciliation. Absalom came to the king and flung himself face down to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 33. Throughout the scene, actually, King David is called king. Never David. Never Absalom's father. Here's a subtle biblical lesson. At this last opportunity for healing, David acted not as a father, but as a king. It was the king who kissed Absalom, not the loving father, not the David whom we know from other stories as a sensitive and caring soul. Later, when David grieves for the loss of his son, he might be recalling that moment when pride and position destroyed what remained of his relationship with his son. For kings, as for all of us, when position intrudes on family, the result is estrangement. So that's just getting us going. This is just by way of introduction. I'm going to share one more little opening reading, a little piece of what we call brain candy to warm up our brain before we turn to texts. And that is, this reading is called Learning Faith from Children. How important are children to the religious life of adults? The Maggid of Dubno answers that question with a parable. Once a father traveled for miles with his son to reach a castle. And whenever they encountered a river or a mountain, the father lifted his son on his shoulders and carried him. And finally they came to the castle, but the gate was shut, and there were only narrow windows along the sides. The father said, "My son, up until now I have carried you. Now the only way we can reach our destination is if you will climb through the windows and open the gate for me from within." So it is, said the Maggid, with parents and children and God. Parents take care of their children, feed and clothe them, educate them, see them through all manners of obstacles. Yet those same parents who have so many strengths often find the gate to God closed. Children have a spiritual magic. They can climb to places their parents cannot reach. They fling open the gates of heaven from within so that they and their parents can reach God together. Well, we'll be doing a little divine detectiving in a little minute here, as we also search together for sacred words of Torah and for a piece of God, a message. from Parashat Pinchas. I will set the scene momentarily. Thank you for joining us. Be right back. Hello again. Welcome back. We're looking at Parashat Pinchas. If you want to pull the text out, it's Numbers chapter 25. It begins on verse 10, goes through chapter 30, verse 1. And I'm just going to do a little overview to start. The parasha elaborates really on the incident that we see at the end of Parashat Balak. Pinchas, who is the son of Eleazar, kills Zimri, the son of Salu, and Cosbi's daughter of Zur, a Midianite, who have entered a tent to have sex. Pinchas, his zealousness, saves the Israelites from a plague. God rewards him with a covenant of peace and his descendants with the office of priesthood for all time. Moses tells the people to crush the Midianites for their trickery in seducing the Israelites into idolatry and whoring, along with other evils. After the plague, Moses and Aaron take a census of the entire Israelite community. This is a second census. The numbers now prove to be a whopping 601,730. Moses also announces the division of the land, providing larger tribes with greater holdings and smaller tribes with lesser ones. Each person assigned a lot of equal size, except for the Levites, who are not given land but are compensated monetarily for their work in the sanctuary. During the taking of the census, the famous case of the daughters of Zelophehad, Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, comes to fruition, and we'll take a look at that. The claim, of course, that their father died off and left no sons, and they should have a right to inherit holdings also. And God will confirm their claim. It does instruct Moses to announce that if a man dies and he has no sons, then a daughter will inherit their property. It's pretty progressive for the ancient Near East. Moses is told to climb to the top of Mount Abiram to see the land of Israel, and he's informed that he'll die there. When Moses requests that his successor be chosen, God tells Moses to appoint Joshua, and Moses is to instruct Joshua to present himself to Eleazar the priest, who will consult the Urim for important decisions and instructions regarding the community. And then the parasha concludes with a description of the offerings to be presented daily on the Sabbath, on the new moons, for Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and for each of the days of Sukkot, including the 8th day, which we call Shmini Atzeret. So just a little overview. We're going to dive a little deeper here momentarily. Just a little chanting for the fun of it. Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch ata Adonai noten ha'Torah. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe le'mohor. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. Heishiv et Hamati me'al b'nei Yisrael be'kano et kiniti b'tocham velo chiliti et b'nei Yisrael bikonati. Lachen emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom. V'haita lo ul zaro acharav brit kehunat olam tachat asher kineh le'elohav vayichaper al b'nei Yisrael. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Say, therefore, I grant him my pact of shalom, says friendship, peace, something deep. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for his God and thus makes expiation for the Israelites. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam natat betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. All right, let's take a little deeper look at this incident of Pinchas spearing and killing the Zimri son of Shalul, the tribe of Shimon, and Cosbi, daughter of Zur, a tribal lead of the Midianites. And it does raise some moral questions, this action. So as the Torah states, the Israelites are, sort of going after other gods, whoring after Midianite women, and they apparently are enticing them, these women, to worship idols like Baal Peor. God commands Moses to put to death all the ringleaders who have at this moment done the wrongdoing. And at that moment, Zimri and Cosbi publicly parade past Moses and enter a tent with the intention of having sexual relations. And Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon, is furious. This is what happens at the end of the last portion, just to be clear. And he takes his spear and he rushes into the tent and he stabs both of them. And the incident concludes here with God rewarding Pinchas with this brit shalom, this covenant of peace or friendship, or his descendants' priesthood for all time. I mean, did Pinchas do the right thing? Right? Should he be praised or condemned for his zeal? Rewarded or punished for his killing? Since Pinchas seems to benefit from breaking the commandment, you shall not kill, how do we and our sages explain the apparent contradiction? So, early rabbinic tradition decided on whether or not Pinchas' act is justified. It was divided. Some commentators point out that Moses, who is present in the camp, sees Zimri and Cosbi walk past him into the tent, but does not signal others to punish them. Without speaking up or suggesting a hearing or trial, Pinchas rushes to execute Zimri and Cosbi. Pinchas does not consult with Moses, who's the highest authority, right, of law, at least within the community, but takes the law and power of prosecution into his own hands. So Rav, head of the Surah Academy, and Samuel, head of the Naharita Academy, these were Babylonian academies a long time ago, they differ strongly in their assessment in Pinchas' actions. Rav condemns him. He holds that Pinchas sees what Zimri and Cosbi are doing and says to Moses, "Did you not teach our people when you came down from Mount Sinai that any Israelite who has sex with a non-Israelite is to be put to death by zealots?" And Moses says, Rav, listens to Pinchas and responds, "Let God who gave the advice execute the advice." Clearly, Rav finds fault with Pinchas for his fanaticism. "Why are you making the judgment and carrying it out?" he asks, criticizing him for failing to follow Moses' instruction. Rav argues that, although Pinchas may have acted within the law, he should have allowed God to execute its provisions rather than doing it himself. On the other hand, Samuel, who often disagrees with Rav, claims that this is a case where God's law is being publicly desecrated, and therefore Pinchas is correct, even heroic, for his decisive action. And furthermore, says Samuel, it is permissible in this case for Pinchas to ignore Moses' warning or authorization, since the action taken by Pinchas is clearly meant to support the law that prohibits such prostitution and idolatry. Rabbi Barbazi raises the possibility that Moses and others in the camp were upset with Pinchas' fanatical behavior and were ready to punish him by excluding him from the community. They were bothered by his circumvention of Moses' authority, by his self-righteous assumption that he did not need the permission of the community or of the courts for his zealous behavior. However, just as they were ready to punish Pinchas with excommunication, says Rabbi Barpasi, that God intervened and announced that the actions of Pinchas were praiseworthy and would be rewarded with a covenant of peace, and that the priesthood would be given to his descendants. And with that, his critics fell silent. Rabbi Barpasi seems to be suggesting the possibility that while Pinchas did the right thing by taking the law into his own hands, he erred in the way in which he acted. He should have consulted with Moses and perhaps others. His actions would have been more just had he gained the community's consent rather than just acting alone. This is what it says in the Jerusalem Talmud, actually, in Sanhedrin 9:7. There are other interpreters that claim that Pinchas acted only when he saw that Moses was neglecting his duty by not carrying out the laws of the Torah. These commentators claim Moses was weak from long years of stressful leadership, and that he forgot the laws forbidding sexual relations between Israelites and non-Israelites, maybe because his wife was not Israelite. Given the situation and the danger of punishment by God to the entire people for Moses' neglect, Pinchas took matters into his own hands, saving the people potentially from a catastrophe. For this reason, these interpreters sort of maintain that Pinchas was entirely justified and was rewarded by God. These teachers conclude that Pinchas's decisive actions teach one to be fierce as a leopard, swift as an eagle, fast as a hart, and strong as a lion in doing God's will. From a midrash, Numbers Rabbah. Moses Maimonides, with his view, is included in the Mishnah Torah, writes that, quote, a Jew may be put to death by zealots if he is found having sexual intercourse with a non-Jewish woman or prostitute. He points to the example of Pinchas, stating that, quote, zealots are justified in killing such a person only if they catch him during the act itself. Should they kill him afterwards, however, they are to be charged with murder. A modern commentary. Pinchas saw in Zimri's act an open breach of the covenant, a flagrant return to the practices that the compact at Sinai had forsworn. There was no precedent in the brief history of the people to determine how to deal with such a religious and moral emergency. So Pinchas's impulsive deed was not merely a kind of battlefield execution, but reflected his apprehension that the demands of God needed human realization and required a memorable and dramatic example against permissiveness in the religious realm. It's by Gunther Plaut, found in a modern commentary. I think I'm going to stop there for a minute, and maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit more about zealotry, and find a few more comments on it. See you in a moment. Did a little searching, found a few more commentaries. Someone who disagrees with Maimonides, a Turkish-born 16th century commentator named Rabbi Moshe ben Chaim Alskeh, suggests that Pinchas's zeal may not have originated in the pure motive of defending the ethical laws of the Torah at all. Rather, his stabbing of Zimri and Cosby is a deliberate act meant to prove he was worthy of the priesthood and of passing on that privilege to his descendants. According to this rabbi, Pinchas realizes his claim to the priesthood is flawed. His father, Eleazar, son of Aaron, is not yet a priest at the time of his birth. Technically, Pinchas is not automatically in line to inherit his father's office. He therefore decides to risk his life and, armed with the mitzvah of killing Zimri, hopes to wipe out what appears to him a stain on his character, namely not being a priest through his father was a priest. This Rabbi, Alskeh, believes Pinchas has an ulterior motive for his demonstration of zeal. He rushes forward to punish Zimri and Cosby, not out of a sense of outrage at their public insult to God and Torah, but because he wishes to attract Moses' attention, secure the office of the priesthood for himself and his offspring. His act, therefore, must be denounced. It's on a commentary to this chapter 25. Commentator Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch disagrees and justifies and praises Pinchas' act as not merely an external forward rush, but the result of his deep inner feelings that made a betrayal of God's affairs feel like a treachery against one's own self. Zimri, he explains, is not an ordinary Israelite. He ranks as a, quote, prince, as one who should set the example as a pattern of noble moral purity. Well, his public act of entering a tent with the intention of having sexual intercourse with a Midianite woman, quote, derided God, Torah, and Israel, end quote. It debased the Jewish people and faith. In the face of Zimri's outrageous public behavior, argues Hirsch, someone is needed to restore the people's faith in God and to demonstrate Israel's commitment to God's commandments. Israel's commitment, Pinchas understands this about the commandments and believes that unless he acts, the people will forfeit their relationship with God and, quote, thereby their own future experience. So Pinchas' conviction was considered an honor and brave act by Hirsch, who concludes that the soul of the nation was at stake. For this reason, God rewards him with a covenant of peace, and his descendants are designated as priests for all time. This is interesting. Hirsch's commentary, contemporary, Rabbi Naftali Zvi Judah Berlin, author of a Torah commentary called Ha'emek Davnar, suggests that while Pinchas' zeal may reflect deep conviction, it also reveals sinister and disturbing motives. People who are ready to murder, terrorize others, and destroy for a cause are often filled with hatred, bitter suspiciousness, and the poison of prejudice. As a result, their acts of vengeance against others are often followed by self-destructive acts. Feelings of guilt and regret lead them to target themselves or those close to them for punishment. Berlin imagines that Pinchas, despite his courageous acts of leadership and his demonstration of commitment to God's Torah, is deeply disturbed by his zealous, impulsive behavior. Despite the fact that his motives are pure, he remains agitated for taking the law into his own hands without consulting Moses, and for not taking Zimri before the judges and courts of his day. This, Berlin comments, explains why God gives him a covenant of peace. It's not a reward for his impulsive behavior, it's a cure for it. This covenant is meant to calm him, that he should not be quick-tempered or angry anymore. Since the nature of his act, killing with his own hands, tended to leave his heart filled with intense emotional unrest, God provides a means to soothe him so that he can cope with the situation and find peace, tranquility of soul. Clearly, Berlin is troubled by Pinchas' zeal, finding it in its signs of psychological disturbance that require healing, and therefore he gets God's covenant of peace. Reviewing the variety of these interpretations, of Pinchas' behavior especially, it reveals deep differences of opinion, like with everything in Jews. Some people applaud Pinchas' action. Others deplore it. And the text leaves us modern readers sort of with a challenge. Was Pinchas' act a dangerous, fanatical event? Or is he a genuine hero of our people and our faith? Let's pick another issue. Let's talk about women's rights next. I'm in chapter 27 at the beginning, verse 1. The daughters of Zelophehad, of Masonite family, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Yosef, came forward. Names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, and they stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting. They said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korach's faction, which banded together against the Lord, but died for his own sin. He left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to this clan just because he had no sons. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, the plea of the Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, you shall assign his property to the nearest relative in his own clan, and he shall inherit it. This is the law of the procedure for the Israelites in accordance with the Lord's command to Moses. Let's stop there. This week we are introduced to 4 revolutionaries. So in addition to Korach and all the revolutions that are taking place with Pinchas here, 4 women create some social change. They dare to stand before Moses, leaders of the people, and demand justice. Pretty timely stuff. Throughout the Torah, we find examples, really, of Hebrew women speaking truth to power. And while there is much to say about the inherent sexism of the patriarchal societies we find in the ancient Near East, it's untrue to see ancient Israel as anything but enlightened on many matters regarding women. So, we read here the text, so let's do a little Tales of the Virtual Rebbe. Rabbi Rachamiel once was challenged. Here's another instance of Judaism's innate sexist attitude toward women. These daughters would not have been left penniless because they had no husband, father, or brother to give them status. How can you defend this? To which Rabbi Rachamiel replied, there's nothing to defend. Yes, before this time, women were ignored, and yes, that is unjust. How do we know this is unjust? Because Torah is now telling us it's unjust. This story attests to the power of Judaism to mature and grow. And it links the Word of God to the desire for justice for all people. This is not a story to be defended. It is a story to be celebrated. So let's go a little deeper into the text. Let's use our Pardes method. Let's get to paradise by looking first at the Peshat, the simple P. The simple reading tells us that the text goes to great lengths to show us that these daughters stood before all of Israel at the tent of meeting, right? Why do you think that's so important? Why did they not speak to Moses alone? Why did everyone have to hear what they have to say? Huh? Yeah, there's usually pardes, a remez, resh, something in there, a clue. Remez is clue. Why do the women say our father had no son rather than say we have no brother? Huh? What point might be they making by not linking themselves even hypothetically to a male? Why in this case did Moses have to take the issue to God? I mean, he's ruled on so many other issues, right? Was there a clear precedent for excluding women? Why is he bothering God with this? So what is Torah telling us when it has God rule on this rather than Moses? And could it be that even Moses was afraid to challenge the status quo on this issue? Could it be that only God could have taken on such an innate prejudice? Well, here's the interpretation, the drash. All right, paradise, drash is an interpretation. Imagine the mindset of the daughters, right? You know what happened to Korach when he challenged Moses. What kind of courage did it take to confront the status quo? And what change did they effect? And how lasting was it? I mean, the very fabric of Israelite society. So, now imagine your own life. Where do you need to speak truth to power? Where do you need the courage of these daughters in your life? And where are you going to find it? Finally, paradise sowed the a secret meeting, if we can find it. I mean, what's your first response when confronted with the challenge of being unjust? Moses did not dismiss the women's claim, took it to God. What do? Most leaders, we're defensive. We hold on to what's always been. Moses stays neutral. He neither rejects nor accepts the claim. He explores it more deeply. How might that translate into your life? Another drosh coming your way. A drosh, a short sermon. Many, but not all of you, will remember a certain radio program that ran Monday through Friday, being a part of newscasts during the Second World War, and then really premiered on May 10th, 1976. It's its own series on ABC Radio, presenting little-known or forgotten facts on a variety of subjects, with some key elements of the story held back until the end. The broadcast always concluded with a variation of the tagline by host Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story. The rest of the story, I think we could translate that word midrash, right? Filling in those gaps to enrich our understanding of the story. You see, Micah, Judaism in general, loves stories. And the stories of the Torah have a great deal to teach us. And when those tales touch us emotionally, as we know in Torah study class, they transform us, leading us not just to feel, but also to act. Sometimes we need a little background to understand the story, right? You can't just watch, season 8 of Game of Thrones. When my boys were young, we watched the Rocky movies in order, Star Wars in the order they were intended by Spielberg, So if you don't know the stories in the Torah, then how are you going to get all of the humor and the wisdom that's contained in the rest of the story, in the Midrash? So right now I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. That is the background, the backstory, the set of events behind the plot of this week's Torah portion. Some narrative history behind the storyline of the biblical tale. Got it? Okay. This week's Torah portion, we know, is named for the character called Pinchas. We've been looking at it. Maybe you read it in preparation, I'm assuming. If you didn't read it, you're not in any trouble. I'm going to discuss this character and why and, sort of who he kills. Actually, I'm not. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on a different part of the story, also contained in this week's Torah portion. We know there's some interesting laws regarding inheritance, specifically how women have come to have the right to own land. It's not just Micah, it's Judaism itself can be pretty progressive, constantly reforming itself to address the needs of its inheritance in every generation. Now, the way the story is told in the Bible is not terribly interesting, nor even really that believable. Right? The text tells us that the daughters of the late biblical character, Zelophehad, petitioned Moses, Eleazar, the chieftains, the whole assembly, all men, to plead for an equal inheritance for themselves and for the law to be changed. Moses talks to God about it. God seems say it's just, it's done. If only those in power were so deferential to justice, right? Gandhi could have made a simple presentation to the Queen of England. Martin Luther King could have, simply attended the Southern Governors Conference. Gays and lesbians, they could just have a little meeting with, the Pope. Set things straight. If only. It's not only a better story here, but a more likely one. So with the help of some scholars and some rabbis and some biblical commentators, the Talmud, a little Wikipedia, and my imagination, here's what Paul Harvey would have called the rest of the story, at least the more plausible backstory. Zelophehad has, chas v'shalom, died in the wilderness, or as we know it, during the years of wandering in the desert. The community mourns. Even after his death, he's appreciated as one of the fleers of Egypt. He's liked, respected even. He's not perfect. He sinned. He gathered a few sticks on Shabbos. There was a small indiscretion when he drank too much, maybe on Purim. One commentator notes he was quite good with the ladies. But he has not as much as whispered a negative word against God, and was certainly not part of Korach's revolt a few chapters ago. He has 5 daughters. At first, I imagined 5 beautiful young women, wielding the traditional female power that flatters men. But looking farther, I discovered that the youngest of them is 40. They've all not been married. This could not have been easy. They must have been very clever. Plus, it ups the ante of the inheritance, not having to pay for any weddings or dowries, right? These women have an agenda and a different kind of power. The eldest, Malha is her name, is a formidable leader. And together with her sisters, Noah, Holga, Milcah, and Tirza, they have an array of talents and abilities, traditional and non-traditional. And their greatest advantage is to have had a father with no sons, no male heirs in what is largely a patriarchal society. So it is the daughters who are the ones who've learned how to throw a baseball, who've gone fishing with their dad, or learned how to armchair quarterback during a Titans game. Heck, good old Zelophehad even sat down with each one of his daughters to share with them their first beer. These women have grown up working alongside their father over the years, learning the structure of power in their own tribe and in the larger community. They've studied business formally and informally. They formed working relationships, strong friendships. They have themselves a high degree of credibility in the community. They've contributed, and their business decisions affect others. With the absence of brothers, they are part of the balance of power. And they know the stories, and probably some secrets about some of the chieftains. Stuff, the chieftains wouldn't want to get out. And now the sisters, politically savvy, see this opportunity to seek justice. They've carefully met with all who would support or oppose the change in law. They've lined their ducks up in a row. They know the specific objections and the misogyny of those who would deny them this justice. And so it takes strength, all of their strength, to endure the members of their own tribe who discourage them, who tell them it's bad timing, who tell them they're out of line, who call them names, who remain silent, are too busy tending to their own lives to stand with them in their justice. There is a sting of those who would forsake what is right for what is easiest. Finally, the day comes, and the sisters wait anxiously to speak. They stand at the flaps at the tent of meeting, preparing to ask for justice in a public forum. They've done the work, years of building relationships, lobbying representatives, carefully lining up support. Wise, astute. They speak at the precise correct moment. As Moses considers their plea, consulting with God, the faces in the crowd represent the full spectrum of support and dissent, resentment, and hope. We know. God got it right. They won. Maybe that could happen again. Women made another step towards equality, paving the way for the state of Tennessee to get the right to vote. Of course, it only took another 2,000 years. Now, some relationships have been strained in the Israelite community at this point. There's sadness, a little bit of loss, but there's joy, there's progress. And here's the most important lesson. Justice was not given to them. It was earned. This is what successful social justice looks like. The achievement of Zelophehad's daughters was a landmark in women's rights. And the story of these 5 women offers a compelling lesson for all those who believe that their destiny is fixed or that divine justice has abandoned them. It encourages us all, especially in light of what's been happening in our country in these last few weeks. It encourages us all to think differently, to use our imaginations and to provide messages of hope for all people who are faced with any kinds of obstacles to success. Maybe the most important legacy of Zelophehad's daughters is their call to take hold of life with our own hands, to move from the place that the others have given us or that we've decided to keep because we feel immobile. Our community here in Nashville, Tennessee, and this great, volunteer state needs our help. And standing with justice has never been comfortable. It has never been easy. But Congregation Micah, it has the intelligence and the connections, the goodwill, the relationships, all of which should help everybody in this country pursue justice. We have the power. And there are injustices all around us. And even better, Micah has its own good story. Worthy of being told for generations. Something to be left to our sons and daughters. Sons if we have them. Or daughters. To grandchildren. So, our social action is important at Micah. We watch. We listen. We march. We speak. We stand. Maybe one day I'll be doing this on the internet, telling people about you and the actions you took so that everyone will know the rest of the story. Another interpretation on the zealousness for God. This one's by the late Rabbi Stephen Pasamanik. He was my teacher. He was a hard teacher. He writes, the rabbis paired each weekly Chumash reading with a complementary prophetic reading. And if you read the pairs carefully, you will find the common thread that joins them. The link may be expressed or implied, but in a few words or a general idea, it's there, somewhere. This week the theme appears to be zealotry, not mere activism, but zealotry. At the end of the previous portion, we read that Pinchas, Moses' great-nephew, took his spear, charged into a tent, and with one thrust dispatched a spinning Israelite man and his Midianite lady friend. Pinchas was acting zealously for God and following Moses' express command to kill those Israelites who had become fond of idolatrous and lewd lifestyles. This week, Pinchas, the zealot, receives the covenant of peace and everlasting priesthood. He's an honored hero. Then the Haftarah, we encounter Elijah, patron presence at the Brit Milah, welcome guest at the Seder, herald of the Messiah. Elijah also had a zealousness for God. He had killed hundreds of idolatrous prophets after demonstrating graphically that they preached a false faith. Because the bloodshed angered Queen Jezebel, Elijah had to run for his life and hide in a cave in the wilderness. And there he tells God how zealous he had been for the true faith, and there he eventually hears God in the still small voice. What is zealotry? Our translation often used the word jealous instead of zealous. But in our Mahdian idiom, the word zealous implies eagerness and ardor, yet the biblical figure exhibited more than that. The word jealous implies elements of suspicion and intolerance, but biblical jealousy goes deeper. Clearly, there's something else involved. Behind jealousy or zealotry, we discover anger. The anger is fierce, uncompromising, and all-consuming. Anger, an emotion as old as humanity, must have animated both Pinchas and Elijah. There's still much to be angry about in our world today. Injustice, hunger, even the substitution of political agendas for moral truths or Jewish values. Each of us can extend the list ourselves. If you're going to be a zealot for any cause, you'll have to work up an anger that will clarify your thought and refine your focus. For those who aspire to be zealots for God, please remember a few things about your anger. First, anger is a powerful emotional laser. Be careful how and where you direct it. It's not for use against the young, the weak, or the helpless, nor should it ever be turned on oneself. The Talmud says that how we handle anger provides a major insight into our personalities. Second, anger is exhausting. You can't be zealous all the time. Pinchas and Elijah acted in a burst of ardor, and then the anger died away. Anger held too long is transformed into bitterness and isolation. And third, anger requires control. It can easily get out of hand and made to infect every part of one's life. You have to know very clearly what purpose your anger serves. When angry, be sure of your moral ground. Anger requires ethical guidance at all times. True zealotry flourished in the Bible. It is rather out of fashion now, but we still have its basic ingredient, anger. Just be careful to assess your moral position before you get angry. Not only can you cause great hurt, you can also hurt yourself. Devar Acher, Rabbi Alan Litvak, zeal, anger, or passion, responds. Biblical Hebrew is terse. There's an economy of words in the Bible that possess difficulties for the modern translator. One word in Hebrew can have multiple meanings in English, such as the difficulty when we speak about the word kina, which is defined as jealousy. We find it in this week's Torah and Haftarah portion, describing the actions of Pinchas and Elijah, respectively. I believe Dr. Pasamanek is correct in stating that the kina described here stems from anger. Both Pinchas in the Torah and Elijah in the Haftarah act out of genuine anger toward those who have transgressed God's word. However, I respectfully suggest that kina can originate in something other than anger. It's a broad term that can be used to express zealous feelings or actions stemming from not just anger, but also passion, jealousy, obsession. Biblical translators chose words based on context as well as a desire to denote a particular understanding. By looking in other places of the biblical canon, we can find different meanings for a word. Therefore, let me share some examples of the Bible's issue of kina. In Isaiah, chapter 26, verse 11, the prophet describes the sinful nations who should be ashamed as they behold your kina for your people and fire consuming your adversaries. While the book of Isaiah is filled with chastising and apocalyptic statements, I hardly think that this is the case in this instance. Isaiah is contrasting the fiery fate of those who do not follow God with that of those who will be rewarded with God's passionate concern. This kina of passion is not reserved for God. Psalm 69 in verse 10 states, "My kina for you, or your house, God's house, has been my undoing." Here the psalmist is describing a devout servant of God who feels he is suffering. The servant is clearly angry with his situation. However, his kina is zeal-grounded in religious loyalty, and certainly not anger directed towards God. Dr. Pasamanek suggests that in order to be true zealots, we must work up an anger that will clarify our thoughts or refine our focus. It is the rare individual who can articulate his or her position through anger. More often we hear about the angry zealots who act irrationally without weighing the relative consequences of their actions. He points to Yitzhak Rabin's assassin. The passionate zealot cannot always think clearly. Think of Romeo and Juliet. This is not to say that zealotry based on anger or passion is necessarily bad. It can also be a good thing. It can motivate us to act. We can be passionate about our beliefs. We can be angry about what we witness in the world. But as Dr. Pasamanek advises, when we are moved to zealous action, we must be careful. Our words and deeds must be steered by more than that. We must use our moral compass. They must not be unchecked by emotion that is grounded in anger or in passion. Some final questions to think about and discuss. Was the anger demonstrated by Pinchas and Elijah's zealotry justifiable? About what in this world are you currently passionate? And how do you demonstrate zeal in your everyday life? We'll conclude with Haftarah next. So we know our Torah portion, named for Pinchas, was zealous about the moral state of his people, was rewarded with the crown of priesthood for his descendants. The Haftarah we're going to hear tells of Elijah, whose devotion earned him the everlasting affection of his people. In both the Torah and the Haftarah, we're told what happened after they had publicly shown their zeal. In addition, there was also another reason for connecting these stories. In Jewish folklore, the two are actually one and the same person in some mystical, inexplicable way. That is, Elijah and Pinchas, same person. Here we're going to hear from 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 46 through chapter 19, verse 21. The setting is, along with King David, the prophet Elijah is the most popular hero in Jewish history, right? He lived in the 9th century before the Common Era amid the semi-nomads in Gilead, east of the Jordan, and beheld with horror the official introduction of the Baal cult into the nation. In a memorable confrontation with the priests of Baal, he demonstrated the superiority of the Eternal. The subsequent killing of the heretical priests forced Elijah to flee from their prosecutor, Queen Jezebel, wife of King Ahab. This is about 869 to 850 before the Common Era. And our Haftarah from 1 Kings recounts the events that followed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nim tovim v'ratzav divreihem hane'emarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amoho u'v'nbiei ha'emet v'tzedek. The hand of the Eternal settled on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran ahead of King Ahab all the way to Jezreel. When Ahab told Queen Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he'd put all the prophets of Baal to the sword, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah who said, May the gods do this to me and more, if by this time tomorrow I have not done the same to your life as you did to the life of one of them. Fearing this, Elijah fled at once for his life. He came to Beersheba in the territory of Judah, and there he left his servant behind, and he went another day's journey into the wilderness. And he came and he sat under a broom bush, and he prayed for death. He said, It's too much. Take my life, Eternal One. I'm no better than my forebears. He lay down under the bush, and he fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him, and it said, Get up. Eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was a cake, baked on the hot stones and a jar of water. After eating and drinking, he lay down again and slept. The angel of the Eternal came a second time and woke him up. And it said, Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. So he got up and he ate and he drank. All that meal gave him enough strength to walk 40 days, 40 nights, as far as the mountain of the god of Horeb. And there he went to a cave and he spent the night. Then the word of the Eternal came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? And he answered, Eternal One, God of heaven and hosts, I have always been devoted to you and only to you. But the people of Israel have broken your covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me. And God said, Go out and stand before me, the Eternal, on the mountaintop. And then the Eternal passed by. A furious wind split mountains and shattered rocks in the presence of the Eternal, but the Eternal was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Eternal was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but the Eternal was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle about his face and went out, standing at the entrance of the cave. And a voice came to him, saying, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been full of zeal for the Eternal, the God of heaven's hosts. The people of Israel have broken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets. I am the last one left, and they're looking to take my life too. And the Eternal said to him, Go back the way you came into the wilderness of Damascus. There anoint Hazael as king of Aram, and anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king of Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat of Abel, Meholah, as prophet to take your place. Anyone who escapes death at the hands of Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and anyone who escapes Jehu will be put to death by Elisha. I will leave in Israel only 7,000, all those who did not kneel to Baal, whose lips did not kiss him. He left that place and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, who was plowing. There were 12 players of oxen before him. He was with the 12th. Elijah went over to him, tossed the mantle onto him. He left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, Let me go kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you. Go back, said he, for what would I do to you? Elijah went back and took the pair of oxen and slaughtered them, using the wood from the ox harness. He boiled the meat and gave it to the people to eat, and then he got up and went after Elijah and became his apprentice. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'amahan ha'omer ve'oseh ha'medaber u'mekayem shekol devarahav emet b'tzedek al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'neviim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu liktusha v'limnucha lechavod u'tifaret Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umevarachim otach yitbarach shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid leolam ba'ed baruch ata Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. I hope you have a good Sabbath. I look forward to seeing you next week, if only virtually. Shabbat Shalom.